And state your full name and spell it.
Michael Johnson, MyChalJohnson.
All right, officer, a couple things to keep in mind when you're testifying. Yes or no answers, please. Don't shake your head. Don't say uh-huh or uh-uh. If you don't understand a question, ask for clarification. If an objection is made, stop talking immediately. Do not answer unless I tell you to. And remember to wait until the question is finished before you answer, because the court reporter is taking down what's being said. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Counsel?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
And I think the court referred to you as officer. You're obviously in a suit, not what we think of as a police uniform. Can you tell us why you're dressed in civilian clothes today?
I'm currently assigned as a patrol major.
And so you don't wear a uniform typically in your job nowadays?
Not right now.
Okay. We will get back to that in a moment, but I'm going to go back and start over. You are currently a peace officer in the state of Minnesota?
Correct.
And you have a license as a peace officer?
Yes, I do.
When did you obtain that license?
In 2005.
And if you could, since then, have you done everything required by the state to maintain your license?
Yes, I have.
And can you tell the jurors, please, your educational background to be a police officer?
I got a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, followed up by a skills certificate that allowed me to be licensed by the state of Minnesota.
And when did you get your bachelor's degree?
In 2002.
And the skills program, when did you finish that?
In 2002.
And so at some point, did you become a police officer with the city of Brooklyn Center?
Yes.
And that was when?
May 31st, 2005.
And so from getting your skills done to that date, did you work at any other law enforcement agencies?
Not as a licensed peace officer.
Okay, explain that to us, please.
I worked as a non-licensed community service officer.
Okay. Which jurisdiction was that for?
City of Cottage Grove.
Okay. And, when I asked when you started, you said May 31st. Do you remember the date pretty specifically?
Yes.
Why do you remember it so well?
It's everything in the department goes back to that one single date as a start date.
And when you started that date, did you get sworn in?
Yes.
And take an oath, that kind of thing?
Yes.
And it's a pretty important day in your career?
Yes, it was.
And so when you started working for Brooklyn Center, what were your job duties?
I was assigned as a patrol officer working an overnight shift.
And so what kind of things did you do as a patrol officer?
Do a little bit of everything for the city of Brooklyn Center, everything from medicals to traffic stops to major type of incidents.
And at some point, did that change from being a patrol officer?
Yes.
And how did that change?
I was assigned to a few other positions along the way, an auto theft investigator and a detective.
And did you eventually become a sergeant?
Yes.
When did you become a sergeant?
In October of 2015.
And so when you're talking about these other things that you did, were they after you became a sergeant or some before?
Those were all before.
Okay. So that helped you get promoted to sergeant?
Correct.
What implicit in my question is, that is a promotion to sergeant, right?
Yes, it is.
All right. And when you became a sergeant, how did your duties change? What did they become then?
It then went from being as a call taker specifically to a person who supervised a group of patrol officers as well as still taking some calls.
So were you a patrol sergeant? Would that be the right term?
That would be correct.
And so as a patrol sergeant, are you still out on the streets most of the time?
It would be about 50-50.
And when you're out on the streets, I guess all the time you're supervising the patrol officers, right?
Yes.
And so when you have been working or in your work as a Brooklyn Center police officer, did you get to know Officer Kim Potter?
It's a fairly small department, so I had known of her since basically the time I had started, but really didn't get to know her until I had been assigned to the shift she worked on in 2019.
Okay. And in 2019, what do you mean by assigned to a shift?
I had the chance to, we bid by seniority. I had enough seniority to bid to a day shift, which she was on that day shift.
Okay. So prior to that, had you worked shifts with her? I'm not quite sure how that works.
No, I hadn't. I was actually assigned to a night shift where she was assigned still to a day shift. So we never even really saw each other at that point.
So for that 14 years, from 2005 to 2014, or 15, you're on different shifts.
Correct.
Okay. But then in 2019, did you become her supervisor?
Yes.
And so then how often would you supervise Kim Potter?
That would be every working day, which worked out to about 7 days every 2 weeks.
And as you're supervising her, well, strike that. Let me ask you this. Throughout your career at Brooklyn Center, were there times when you socialized with Ms. Potter outside of the workplace?
Not before 2019.
But after that, you had those occasions?
Yes.
And do you also know Officer Anthony Lucky?
Yes.
And when did you get to know him?
I don't know the exact year, but he was one of the explorers for the Brooklyn Center Police Department when he was still in high school.
So still a teenager.
Yes.
And then obviously he became employed at Brooklyn Center as well, correct?
Yes.
And so did you know him then? Well, obviously you knew him. Did you supervise him then?
He was in the field training program. I wasn't the field training supervisor, but for the time that he was assigned to Officer Potter for field training, I was his duty sergeant.
So just so we can understand how that works, the trainees, the probationers, have a separate supervisor for that program.
Yeah, when they're involved in the field training program, there is a supervisor who is in charge of the program, assigns them where they need to be, and track how they're doing.
When they're out on the street, then it's the patrol sergeant who's supervising them technically out on the street. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. And then there's also a field training officer with them.
Correct.
Now, I mentioned earlier, kind of why you're not in uniform. Are you still with the Brooklyn Center Police Department?
I am not.
And when did you switch jobs?
In October of 2021.
And where are you working now?
I work for the Goodhue County Sheriff's Office.
And so that is the reason. We kind of teased down later. You're not in a uniform. That's a non-uniform position.
Correct.
Okay. During your career, have you received training in how to use a taser?
Yes.
And have you been certified to use a taser?
Yes.
Do you recall when you first became certified to use a taser?
The first time was in my initial training of the skills program back in 2002.
So even before you became a police officer?
Yes.
And when you started at Brooklyn Center, did you get authorized to carry a taser for Brooklyn Center?
Yes.
And before you could carry there, did policy require that you receive some training or certification?
Yes, initial training.
And did you do that when you first started in 2005?
Yes.
And since 2005, then, when you were certified, have you been certified every year since then?
Yes.
And when you were a patrol and a sergeant, did you carry a taser when you were out on the street?
Yes.
As part of your training, have you been put through what we'll call voluntary, how shall I say this, voluntarily being stunned by a taser?
Yes.
Explain what that means for the jury, please.
As a part of the training, they use the two probes of a taser, and when they pull the trigger of the taser, it then has the incapacitating power over you, and you kind of lose function of your body.
So the voluntary part of this is that you agreed to do it,
Yes.
and that's as part of the training?
Yes.
So they actually shoot you with a taser.
Yes.
And how many times did you volunteer to do that?
Once.
Why not twice?
Because it's not a great feeling.
Okay. And when that's done, are there others around you to help you?
Yes.
And explain that, what that means.
They're there because your muscles will lock up, and if your legs lock up, you lose your balance and can fall over. So they're there to catch you if you fall.
And have you also been involuntarily exposed to the effects of a taser?
Yes.
Can you explain that for the jurors, please?
There have been times that my partners have used a taser on suspects where if your hands get in between the taser probes, you then will receive that current through you.
And that has happened to you?
Several times.
And how does that feel?
It does not feel very good.
So, based on those experiences and your training as a certified taser user, if somebody is going to get tased, what do you need to do if you're holding the person?
You try not to have your hands in between the taser probes.
I'm going to turn your attention to April 11 of 2021. Do you recall that date?
Yes.
And were you working that day?
Yes, I was.
And just tell us what your shift was on that day.
I start my shift at 5:30 in the morning, and it goes until 5:30 in the evening.
And you were a patrol sergeant that day?
Yes.
Do you recall how many officers were out on the streets during that shift?
I don't remember exactly.
How would it typically be? How many would it typically be?
We would typically have 3 to 5 starting at 6 a.m. We would then have one more possibly starting at 2 and one more possibly starting at 4.
And did you hear a call for backup from Officer Lucky?
Yes.
And at the time, did you know he was in a trainee capacity?
Yes.
And he was with an FTO?
Correct.
And did you know who the FTO was?
Yes.
And who was that?
That was Officer Kim Potter.
And so the call was about what do you recall the call for backup being about?
I heard that he was on a traffic stop and was asking for a second officer to his location.
Would that be customary to call a backup on a traffic stop?
Yes.
So nothing unusual about his request for backup on that traffic stop?
No.
And did you respond that you would come to that to back him up?
Yes.
And how did you do that?
Over the radio, I called out my call number and said that I would be en route.
Do you recall him providing the location of the traffic stop?
Yes.
Was it an area you were familiar with?
Yes.
And did you then go to that location?
Yes.
And do you recall roughly how long it took you to get there?
I would probably say 2-3 minutes.
So you were not too far away?
No.
And can you just describe for the jury the general location where that stop was?
I would be around 63rd Avenue and Orchard Avenue.
Okay. Now I'm going to put up on the screen an exhibit number 1, which has been received in evidence. Do you see that exhibit in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Do you recognize what's depicted there?
That would be 63rd Avenue, centralized on Orchard Avenue.
And do you see the location of where the stop was?
Yes.
And there should be in front of you a little stylus.
Yes.
And if you want to just draw a circle around the area where that was. And so, just to be clear, or for the record, you're drawing a circle around the location location on this photograph were the blue rectangle and the yellow XR, correct?
Correct.
All right. And so did you, in fact, drive up and stop behind the stop?
Yes.
Okay. And so this location, from your years of working at Brooklyn Center Police Department, what county is this area located in?
Hennepin County.
And as you arrived there, where did you park in relation to Officer Lucky?
I parked directly behind him.
And were you working alone or with another officer?
I was alone.
And so as you got there, did you approach their vehicle then?
Yes.
And what did you see kind of generally when you approached the other squad car?
As I approached, both doors were open of the squad car, with Officer Lucky sitting on the driver's side and Officer Potter sitting on the passenger side. In front of them was a four-door white sedan.
Okay. And did you have a conversation then with either Officer Potter or Officer Lucky?
I talked with Officer Potter.
Okay. And what did you learn?
I learned that the driver of the vehicle had a warrant and was also a party to a order for protection.
And did you learn more information about the warrant as you were there?
Yes.
What did you learn about the warrant?
I learned that it was a gross misdemeanor warrant for a weapons possession.
And based on your years of work as a police officer, what did that gross misdemeanor weapons warrant mean to you? What did that indicate?
It means that a person had been arrested for carrying a firearm without a permit.
So it's a permit violation.
Yes.
And so as you're conversing with them, was a decision made about what to do?
Yes.
And what was that decision?
That Officer Lucky was going to place the driver under arrest and then look more into the order for protection.
And so was that what was done?
Yes.
And how many of you then reapproached the white car?
3 of us.
And how did the three of you divide it up?
Yeah. So Officer Lucky went to the driver's side with Officer Potter following a little ways behind him as the training officer, and I approached on the passenger side.
And so why did you go to the passenger side?
Yeah, I usually put one person on each side so that you get a good view inside the vehicle to see what's happening.
So that's sort of standard operating procedure, shall we say, when you approach a vehicle with backup?
It's one way of doing it.
Okay. And Ms. Potter went to stay towards the back of the vehicle at the time?
I believe so.
Was that customary for an FTO?
Yes.
On the day of April 11th, were you wearing a body camera?
Yes.
And were you also, operating a squad car that had a dash camera?
Yes.
And, excuse me a second. And the dash camera, was it activated as you came up and stopped at this stop?
It was activated when I activated my body camera.
Okay. So did you activate your body camera before arriving at the stop?
I activated it just as I pulled up.
Okay. And why did you do that?
That's policy. Any traffic stop, we turn on our body camera.
Okay. And so when you do that, your dash camera automatically comes on.
Yes.
And before today, have you had a chance to review your body camera from this incident?
Yes, I have.
And have you also reviewed the dash camera?
Yes, I have.
And before today, we were able to show you some of those that would be exhibits today, correct?
Yes.
And so you recognize those as accurate recordings of what happened?
Yes.
Your Honor, we would offer Exhibit 61.
Is there any objection to 61?
No.
There be no objection. 61 will be admitted into evidence and you may publish counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, before we do that, there's a couple of questions I want to ask so that the jurors can understand some of the things going on in the video, all right? Do you recall at one point learning the name of the driver?
Yes.
And what was the name of the driver?
Daunte Wright.
Do you remember Ms. Potter asking you or making some comment about the Wright brothers?
Yes.
And did you understand what she was talking about? Well, what did that mean to you when she raised that?
It meant she knew something about them that should have kind of sparked my interest.
But your response was what?
I didn't know who they were.
Okay. And the Wright brothers that she was referring to, do you know who she was referring to?
No.
Okay. And had there been a Wright family that had been sort of known to officers?
There was another one that I was aware of.
And they did not have a Daunte Wright?
No.
All right, so what I'm going to do then is start Exhibit 61, please. Now, let's pause here just for a moment, please. So, as you can see, there is 2 videos present on the screen, correct?
Yes.
And the video in the lower right, do you recognize what that is?
Yep, that would be the dash cam video for my squad.
And the video in the upper left?
That would be my body cam video.
And just as the video started, we did not hear any audio.
Correct.
Eventually there will be audio, correct?
Yes.
Can you explain why that happens?
Both of the cameras are constantly recording and will save the first 30 seconds before the video is actually started.
And that 30 seconds is the part without audio?
Yes.
Okay. And then, as we're looking at this, just for the record, its timestamp is 13:59:16. Where are you driving here in this video?
This would be 63rd Avenue.
And which direction are you heading here?
I believe this would be headed eastbound.
Yeah, I tested you a little too much, didn't I? Is this, you're about to make a U-turn, correct?
Okay, if this is before I'm about to make the U-turn, I'd be going westbound.
Yeah, and so you had to make a U-turn to get back to the stop.
Yes.
And then the 13:59 military time, correct?
Yes.
And so that would be 1:59 p.m.?
Yes.
All right. Okay, let's go ahead and play the video then, please.
No, female doesn't know who he is. Said he's a 14-year-old black male with dreads. When he walked in the house, said he was running from the police, and he needed her to be quiet until they left.
You're going to want to find out who the female is because there's no repeat.
He's got a gross misdemeanor warrant and there's an OFP for a female, so I need to ID her. There's also residue like weed on the middle console, so probably search the car. Apparently the car is his brother's.
You want to tell him what the warrant's for?
Warrant is for the weapons violation.
Oh, gross, yeah.
So
Daunte Wright.
Daunte
Wright?
Wright.
Aren't those the Wright brothers? Not the ones that fly, but the other ones?
I don't think so.
Okay, so I'm just gonna get him out and I cuff him up. I mean, he's at work, so I'm just
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, we will be here in a second.
All right, man, here, give me a bit.
And by the way, if I didn't ask you, what is your current rank at Goodhue County?
Major.
Okay, so Major Johnson, we heard in that video a voice saying, "I don't think so." Did you recognize that voice?
Yes,
Whose voice was that?
that was mine.
And that was in response to Ms. Potter's question about the Wright family.
Yes.
So then we saw just at the tail end of that, the three of you start to approach the vehicle, correct?
Yes.
And when you approached the vehicle on the passenger side, what did you observe?
I observed that there was a female sitting in the passenger seat in the front.
Did she have anything in her hands at the time?
Not that I remember.
Okay. Do you remember indicating that she had some paperwork in her hands as you approached?
That's possible.
And then what did you observe next?
I observed that Officer Lucky had asked Mr. Wright to step out of the vehicle.
And did Mr. Wright do that?
Yes.
And what happened then?
I couldn't overhear a lot of what was being said, but I was able to gather he was telling them about the warrant.
Did you hear Officer Lucky tell Mr. Wright to do anything at that point in time?
I heard him to tell him to turn around
Okay. And what about his hands? Did he say anything about that?
and put his hands behind his back.
And then at some point, at that point, did you tell Mr. Wright he was under arrest?
Yes, I did.
And why did you tell him that at that point?
Procedurally, you tell somebody that they are under arrest before placing them under arrest. If the person then doesn't cooperate with the arrest, they've been told that lawfully they are being arrested.
And so what's the importance of telling them that right at that moment in time?
Because that was just about before he was to put his hands on Mr. Wright.
So if they don't cooperate, could you charge them with some additional crime?
Yes.
Because you've told them that, right?
Yes.
So then, as you saw that going on, did you hear Officer Lucky saying anything?
Yes.
After what did you hear him say after that?
I heard him say something about don't pull away.
What did you notice anything about Mr. Wright at the time?
I saw part of his body start moving away.
And so what did you observe then after that?
That's when I actually opened the passenger side door.
And why did you open the passenger door?
I was going to make sure the car was in park and the vehicle was shut off so they couldn't leave.
And so when you opened the passenger door, what did you do next?
I leaned in across the passenger and put my right hand on the shift lever and my left hand on the ignition key.
All right. What about the passenger? Did you take any steps to deal with the passenger at that point?
There wasn't much I was able to do. I was kind of in a compromised position, so I just leaned against her with my body weight.
Okay. And did she put up any resistance to you when you did that?
No.
And at that point, where were you standing?
I was leaning into the vehicle.
Okay. Where were your feet?
Feet were either on the curb or on the street.
And did you said something about grabbing the shift knob, correct?
Yes.
And what did you do with that?
I pushed it forward, which would be towards the park position.
So had it been out of park?
I don't believe so.
Okay. But you said you pushed it forward. I'm just trying to...
I was pushing it as far as it would go forward. That way I knew that it was in the park position.
And did you know whether the engine was on at the time?
I don't.
You indicated you reached toward the keys, right?
Yes.
What were you trying to reach for the keys for?
I was taking the key and I was turning it forward, which would be towards the off position.
So you were attempting to turn the vehicle off?
Yes.
Did you know, but you didn't know whether it was on or off?
I don't know if it was.
And at that point, what was Mr. Wright doing?
He was struggling with Officer Lucky.
Okay. Was he able to get back into the vehicle at that point?
Yes.
And what did you think he was going to try and do at